Namo Buddhaya, the Satasahasrika Prajnaparamita Sutram, the large Sutra on perfect wisdom, the chapter 33rd, on dedication and rejoicing, turning over in its distinctive function and merit. Maitreya, when Venerable Subhuti, we consider a Bodhisattva's meritorious work which is founded on his rejoicing at the merit of others, and which, having been made common to all beings, has been dedicated to their supreme enlightenment, and that without taking anything as a basis. And if we compare that with the meritorious work of all beings founded on rejoicing, and with the meritorious work founded on giving and on morality, on meditational development, on the part of those who have set out in the vehicle of the disciples or in that of the Pratyekabuddhas, then a Bodhisattva's meritorious work founded on rejoicing, which, having made common to all beings, has been dedicated to their supreme enlightenment, is declared to be the best, the most excellent, the sublime, the highest and supreme, with none above it. The turning over under the aspect of baselessness, unequaled, equal, and the unequaled. And why? Because the meritorious work founded on given morality and meditational development of all those who belong to the vehicle of the disciples and Pratyekabuddhas aims at the taming of their own self and the appeasing of their own self, the parinirvana of their own self, and so do their spiritual practices such as the 37 dharmas which act as wings to enlightenment, etc., to the 6 superknowledges. But the Bodhisattva's meritorious work founded on rejoicing is dedicated to the supreme enlightenment for the taming of all beings, for their appeasing and parinirvana, so far about the function of dedication. Subhuti. This Bodhisattva considers the Buddhas and Lords beyond reckoning, innumerable and measureless, who have won parinirvana in the countless world system in the 10 directions in each single direction, and their store of merit associated with the 6 perfections and acquired in the span of time which begins with their first production of the thought of enlightenment, proceeds to the time when they won the supreme enlightenment, goes on until they finally enter nirvana, in the realm of nirvana, which leaves nothing behind, and ends with the vanishing of the good lore. He considers the foundation of meritorious work based on given morality and meditational development on the part of those who belong to the vehicles of the disciples and Pratyekabuddhas. He considers the roots of good without laws of those who are still in training, as well as the roots of good without outlaws or the adepts. He considers the mass of morality of those Tathagatas, the mass of concentration, the mass of wisdom, the mass of emancipation, and the mass of the vision and cognition of emancipation, as well as their solicitude for beings, their great friendliness and great compassion, as well as their immeasurable and incalculable Buddha dharmas, and also the Dharma which has been demonstrated by those Buddhas and Lords, and the roots of good of those who, through this demonstration of Dharma, have attained the fruit of extreme winner, etc., to the enlightenment of the Pratyekabuddha, or who thought it have entered on the Bodhisattva's special way of salvation, and also the wholesome roots which have been planted under those Tathagatas or Arhats who have now entered parinirvana. In this meditational development, he piles up all that mass of merit and rejoices over it with the most excellent sublime jubilation, the highest and utmost jubilation, with none above it, unequaled, equal and the unequaled. Having rejoiced, he would make the wholesome root associated with the rejoicing common to all beings and dedicated to their supreme enlightenment with the words, "May it feed the supreme enlightenment of myself and of all beings." Now when a follower of the great vehicle turns over his thought in such a manner, do then those foundations of merit and the objects involved in these contemplations exist in such a way, and are they apprehended in such a way that they would be treated as signs by those sons of good family who belong to the great vehicle? Maitreya. Those foundations and objects are not apprehended in such a way that they are turned over into the supreme enlightenment after they have been treated as signs. Subhuti. If he had on foundations which do not exist, and through objects which do not exist treated as a sign, those Buddhas and lords and their wholesome rules, as well as the disciples and Pratyekabuddhas, the learners and adepts, and their wholesome rules, all of which he had turned over into the supreme enlightenment by way of a sign, should he not beware of perversion or perception, thinking that there is permanence in impermanent, is in suffering, what belongs to self in what doesn't belong to self, come in what is not come. There must be a perverted perception, perverted thought, perverted view, but it's not so that as the foundations and objects are non-existent, so is enlightenment, so is the thought which is turned over, so are the six perfections, etc. too, so is all knowledge. But if just as their foundations and objects, so the enlightenment, the thought, form, etc., to the Buddha Dharma are non-existent, then what is the foundation? What's the object? What the enlightenment? What the thought? What the wholesome rules? And what that foundation of meritorious work associated with the rejoicing, which is turned over into the supreme enlightenment? Maitreya. If Venerable Subhuti, then Bodhisattva is one who has coursed in the six perfections, who has honored many Buddhas, who has planted wholesome roots, who is upheld by good spiritual friends, and who trains in dharmas as empty of their own marks, then he is able to turn over into the supreme enlightenment without having made to assign those foundations and objects, those Buddhas and lords, those wholesome roots and those foundations of meritorious work associated with rejoicing. But he succeeds in turning over neither by way of duality nor by way of non-duality, not by way of sign nor by way of the signless, not by way of basis nor by way of a non-basis, not by way of defilement or by way of purification, not by way of production or by way of stopping. If, however, those bodhisattvas have not coursed in the six perfections, have not honored the Buddhas, have not planted wholesome roots, are not upheld by good spiritual friends, and have not trained in dharmas as empty of their own marks, then they turn over into the supreme enlightenment while making those foundations and objects into signs, as well as those wholesome roots and those productions of thought associated with rejoicing. But this perfection of wisdom expounded in such a way should not be taught in front of a bodhisattva who has newly set out in the vehicle, and so with the other perfections and the 18 kinds of emptiness. And why? For he would lose that little faith which is his, that little serenity, affection, and respect which are his. In front of an irreversible bodhisattva, great beings should these be taught and expounded, and also the other perfections and the 18 kinds of emptiness. When he has heard it, he will not tremble, not be frightened or terrified. If he is one who has been taken hold of by the good friend, if he is upheld by the good friend, has done his duties under the genius of the past, has planted wholesome roots and honored many Buddhas, then the Bodhisattva can turn over into the supreme enlightenment, the foundation of meritorious work associated with rejoicing, Subhuti. That thought by which one has rejoiced and turned over, that thought is at the time of turning over extinct, stopped, depart, reversed, and so are those foundations and objects. What then is the thought associated with rejoicing? What the foundation and object, and what the wholesome roots which he turns over into the supreme enlightenment? What is the thought which he turns over? If two thoughts can never meet, and if the own being of a thought cannot possibly be overturned, but if a bodhisattva who courses in perfection of wisdom cognizes thus, non-existence is the perfection of wisdom, and so are the other perfections, so is form, etc., to Buddha Dharmas, then the Bodhisattva succeeds in turning over into the supreme enlightenment, the foundation of meritorious work associated with rejoicing. When he turns over in this way, then it becomes turned over into the supreme enlightenment. Thereupon Maitreya, the Bodhisattva, the great being, said to Subhuti, the elder, "How do, by a son or daughter of good family who has newly set out in the vehicle, these wholesome roots become turned over into full enlightenment, and how do they become turned over after the foundation of meritorious action, which is connected with the rejoicing, has been acquired?" Subhuti. If Maitreya Bodhisattva, who newly set out in the vehicle, courses in perfect wisdom and grasps this perfection of wisdom without taking it as a basis or without treating it as a sign, Then he has much trust and confidence in the perfections, the 18 kinds of emptinesses, etc., to the 18 special Buddha Dharmas. He has been taken hold of by the good friend, and these his good friends expound to him according to the meaning and the letter. Just this perfection of wisdom and the other perfections, and expound them to him in such a way that he becomes one who is not lacking in the perfection of wisdom and in all the perfections, etc., to the 18 special Buddha Dharmas. He has entered on the certainty that he will be saved by the special methods of the Bodhisattva. He will expound the deeds of Mara, and when he has heard the deeds of Mara, there will be in him neither growth nor diminution. And why? Because of these deeds of Mara, no owing being is made manifest, and he will never be deprived of the Buddhas and the Lords until the time that he enters on the Bodhisattva special mode of salvation. Thereafter, he will plant sufficient wholesome roots to enable him to obtain the Bodhisattva family, and he will no more be deprived of the Bodhisattva family until the time that he fully knows the Supreme Enlightenment. Moreover, a Bodhisattva who has newly set out in the vehicle considers the accumulations of merit of those Buddhas and Lords whose tracks are cut off, whose course is cut off, whose obstacles are cut off, who are guides through the world of becoming, those whose tears have dried up, whose impediments are all crushed, whose own burdens are laid down, whose own will has been reached, in whom the fetters of becoming are extinguished, whose thoughts are well freed by right understanding, and who have attained to the highest perfection and the control of the entire hearts, as well as the accumulations of merit of the Tathagatas who abide in countless world systems and in all the 10 directions, and demonstrate Dharma together with their congregations of disciples, and also the accumulations of merit of those who have planted wholesome roots under them or in the good families of warriors, etc., or among the various kinds of gods. All these he piles up, rolls into one lump, and weights up, and then rejoices over them with the most excellent and sublime jubilation, the highest, the utmost jubilation, which has none above it, and having rejoiced at it, he should turn over into the Supreme Enlightenment that wholesome root associated with the rejoicing. The turning over marked by the absence of perverted views. Maitreya, if Venerable Subhuti, a Bodhisattva who has newly set out in the vehicle, has brought to mind all the wholesome roots of those Buddhas and Lords, together with their congregations of disciples, and if, after having rejoiced over them with the best, etc., with the utmost jubilation, he turns them over into the Supreme Enlightenment, how is it that the Bodhisattva doesn't have a perverted perception, perverted thought, or a perverted view? Subhuti, if Subhuti, the Bodhisattva, brings to mind those Buddhas, the Lords, together with their congregations of disciples, then he is not one who perceived a Buddha or a disciple or a wholesome root, but with regard to the thought by which he turns over, he becomes in that very thought one who perceives the thought only. When he turns over in this way, the Bodhisattva has no perverted perception, thought, or view. But if the Bodhisattva, having brought to mind those Buddhas and Lords and those wholesome roots, makes them into a sign, and having made them into a sign, turns them over into the Supreme Enlightenment, then this turning over amounts to a perverted perception, thought, and view. If again a Bodhisattva wisely knows those Buddhas and Lords and those wholesome roots and the thought by which he brings them to mind as just extinct, and if he reflects that what is extinct that cannot be turned over, and then this extinction is very dramatic nature of the thought by which he turns over, as well as of that which he turns over, and of that into which he turns over. If he turns over in this way, then he turns over evenly and not unevenly, not wrongly. It is that the Bodhisattva should turn over. The Bodhisattva considers the accumulation of merit of the past, future, and present Buddhas and Lords, from their first production of the thought of enlightenment up to their parinirvana, and further up to the vanishing of the good Dharma, as well as the accumulation of merit of the disciples and Pratyekabuddhas, and also the wholesome roots which are result of hearing the demonstration of Dharma, have been planted by the common people, by the Devas, Nagas, Yakshas, Gandharvas, Asuras, Garudas, Kinnaras, and Maharagas, by members of good warrior families, etc., to the goes up to the gods of the pure abode. All that he piles up rolls into one lump and waits up, and then heaven rejoiced over it with the utmost, with the most excellent and sublime jubilation, which has none above it, is unequaled and equals the unequaled. He turns all this over into the supreme enlightenment, and if he again turns over while being aware that those dharmas are extinct, stopped, departed, reversed, and that the dharma also into which it, the wholesome root, is turned over in empty, it is turned over is empty and its own of its own being, and then it, the wholesome root, becomes something which has been turned over into full enlightenment. And so it does if he turns over while aware the dharmas cannot turn over dharmas, because all dharmas are empty in their own being. It is that the Bodhisattva who courses in the perfection of wisdom and the other perfections is without perverted perception, thought, or view. And why? Because he doesn't settle down in those turnings over, and since he doesn't review those wholesome roots and that thought of enlightenment, he cannot settle down in it. This is the supreme turning over of a Bodhisattva great being. The isolatedness of the factors involved in turning over. The accumulation of the foundation of meritorious work furthermore becomes something which the Bodhisattva has turned over into full enlightenment if he remains aware that this accumulation of the foundations of meritorious work is isolated from the skandhas, elements, and sense fields, from the 37 dharmas which act as wings to enlightenment, etc., to from the 18 special dharmas of a Buddha, and if furthermore he remains aware that the foundation of meritorious work associated with rejoicing is isolated in its own being, that the Buddhas and the Lords are isolated from the own being of a Buddha, that also the wholesome roots are isolated from the own being of wholesome roots, the accumulations from the own being of the accumulations, the thought of enlightenment from the own being of the thought of enlightenment, the thought of turning over from the own being of the turning over, enlightenment from the own being of enlightenment, the perfection of wisdom from the own being of the perfection of wisdom, etc. The Buddha Dharmas are isolated from the own being of the Buddha Dharmas. It is thus that the Bodhisattva should course in the isolated perfection of wisdom. This is the perfection of wisdom of a Bodhisattva, a great being. Mindful recollection of the own being of the wholesome roots of the Buddhas. Moreover, Bodhisattva should mindfully recollect all the wholesome roots of those Buddhas and Lords and turn them over in such a way that he is aware that such as that turning over, so is that thought by which one turns over. Both are of the same kind, have the same own being. When he remains aware of that, in the wholesome root becomes something that has been turned over into full enlightenment. When he turns over in this way, he is without perverted perception, thought, or view. If, however, the Bodhisattva who courses in perfect wisdom becomes aware of that wholesome root of those Buddhas and Lords by way of a sign, then he doesn't succeed in turning it over into full enlightenment. And even if he brings to mind that the Buddhas, the Lords of the past who have entered parinirvana are without a sign and without an objective sphere, and if he treats that as a sign, then he does not succeed in turning over those wholesome roots into full enlightenment. And he has perverted perception, perverted thought, and perverted views. But if he does not perceive the Buddhas and Lords, nor those wholesome roots, nor those accumulations, nor those productions of thought, and if he doesn't make them into a sign, then the wholesome roots become something that has been turned over into full enlightenment, and the Bodhisattva is then without perverted perception, thought, or view. The turning over in its association with skills in means. Maitreya, how, Venerable Subhuti, does the Bodhisattva turn over without making a sign? Subhuti, the Bodhisattva should train himself in the skill in means contained in this perfection of wisdom. For the Bodhisattva should know about skill and means from this perfection of wisdom, and without resorting to the perfection of wisdom, he cannot possibly turn over the foundation of meritorious work. Maitreya, one should surely not say, Venerable Subhuti, that those Buddhas and Lords do not exist in the perfection of wisdom, nor those wholesome roots, nor those accumulations, nor those productions of thought, etc. One should not say that one does not turn over into full enlightenment. Subhuti, a Bodhisattva who courses in perfect wisdom should consider as follows. Stopped are those personal lives those wholesome roots, those accumulations, and those productions of thought. But it is only when one has made a sign that the Buddhas and Lords are discriminated, as well as those wholesome roots, those accumulations, and those productions of thought. And the Tathagatas withhold their sanctions from the rejoicing of someone who in this way turns over by way of a sign. And why? For this becomes to him a great basis that he makes into a sign the Buddhas and Lords who have entered parinirvana, and he discriminates and apprehends them. Therefore, Bodhisattva who wants to turn over the wholesome roots should not turn them over after having apprehended them and made them into a sign, for the Tathagatas have got ascribed great wonder-working power of the turning over carried out by one who perceives a basis or a sign. And why? Because the turning over is poisonous and thorny. The turning over is signless. It is just as with food that seems excellent but has been mixed with a poison which is concealed under its apparently desirable color and taste. Some foolish person might think that it should be eaten. When he eats it, it appears good in its color and taste, but its transformation in some who eats it leads to a painful conclusion. Just so, someone who has badly seized the teaching, badly distinguished it, and who badly repeats it, and who neither knows its meaning nor understands it, will instruct others as follows: "Come here, you son of good family, and consider the wholesome roots which the Buddhas and Lords of the past, future, and present have effected in the interval between their first production of the thought of enlightenment, up to their achievement of the supreme enlightenment, up to their entry into final nirvana in the nirvana element, which leaves nothing behind, and up to the vanishing of the good Dharma by concursing in perfection of wisdom and in the other perfections, and also the wholesome roots is stated with the four trances, etc., to the 18 Buddha Dharmas, through the accumulation of which the Buddha feels are purified and being matured. And of those Buddhas and Lords, the mass of morality, concentration, wisdom, and emancipation, and the mass of the vision of the cognition of emancipation, as well as the cognition of the knowledge of all modes, the cognition of the state of being always mindful, and dwelling always in even-mindedness, and also the wholesome roots affected by the disciples and by those predestined to Pratyekabuddhahood, and also the wholesome roots affected by gods, Nagas, Yakshas, Gandharvas, Asuras, Garudas, Kinnaras, and Maharagas, and then having piled all these up, roll them into one lump, and weight them up, turn them over into the supreme enlightenment. Thus this turning over, since it is carried out by means of a sign and a basis, causes people to partake in poisonous. It is just like the poisonous food mentioned before. There can be no turning over for one who perceives a basis. And why? For a basis is poisonous, has a range, and is connected with signs, causes, and conditions. One who turns over in this way has not been well taught by the Tathagata. He does not preach that the Tathagata has said. He doesn't preach the Dharma. Followers of the Bodhisattva vehicle should not train in this way. The turning over as enjoyed by the Buddhas, Maitreya. How then should one turn over the wholesome roots of the past, future, and present Buddhas and Lords, after having rejoiced over them from the production of their first thought of enlightenment to their awakening to the supreme enlightenment, to the period when their good Dharma remains established, including their congregations of disciples, all the wholesome roots which they have affected during this interval, until they have attained all knowledge, etc., to how should one, after having rejoiced over them, turn over the wholesome roots planted by gods, Nagas, Yakshas, Gandharvas, Asuras, Garudas, Maharagas, humans, and non-humans? And how should one turn over so that those wholesome roots are actually turned over into the supreme enlightenment? Subhuti, here a follower of the great vehicle who courses in the perfection of wisdom and who doesn't want to calumniate the Tathagata should turn over as follows. As the Tathagatas cognize with their unsurpassed Buddha cognition those wholesome roots, their kind such as it is, their own being such as it is, their marks such as they are, and as they exist in their own dharmic nature. Just so I rejoice, and as the Buddhas, the Lords, cognize it So also I turn over into the supreme enlightenment. It is thus that a follower of the great vehicle should turn those wholesome rules over into the supreme enlightenment. When he turns over in such a way, he doesn't calumniate the Tathagatas, he preaches what the Tathagatas has said, and he preaches the Dharma. It is then that the Bodhisattva turning over becomes non-poisonous. The turning over is unincluded in what belongs to the triple world. Furthermore, someone who has set out in the great vehicle and who courses in the perfection of wisdom should turn over those wholesome rules while he realizes that form is unincluded in the world of sense desire, the world of form and the formless world, and so are feelings, etc., to cognition, co-production, and so also the perfection of wisdom and the other perfections, and so suchness, dharmahood, the element of Dharma, the reality limit, and the unthinkable element, and so are the Tathagatas morality, concentration, wisdom, emancipation, wisdom, vision, and cognition of emancipation, his knowledge of all modes, his state of being always mindful, and his always dwelling in the even mindedness. But what is the unincluded? That is not past, future, or present. And why? Because just as that is unincluded in the triple world, so it also the turning over and the dharmas which and into which one turns over, and he who turns over, and also the Buddhas and the Lords and their wholesome roots, and also the disciples and Pratyekabuddhas and their wholesome roots. But what is unincluded? That is not past, future, or present. If, however, the Bodhisattva who courses in perfect wisdom perceives that form, etc., to the Tathagata state of always dwelling in mindfulness and unincluded in the triple world, and that which is unincluded is not past, future, or present, he must remain aware that it is not possible to turn over these dharmas by way of a sign or a basis. And why? Because the dharma's own being doesn't exist, and that of which an own being doesn't exist is non-existence. But it is impossible to turn over non-existence by way of non-existence. It is thus that the Bodhisattva's turning over becomes non-poisonous. If, however, follower of great vehicle turns over these wholesome rules by over sign and a basis, then he turns them over wrongly. But the Buddhas, the Lords, do not praise the wrong turning over as the right turning over. Such a one does not turning over with the Buddha's and Lord's praise. He doesn't turn over in the perfection of giving, etc., to the perfection of wisdom. He thus will not fulfill the six perfections, etc., to Buddha Dharmas. He will not fulfill the concentrations or the Dharma doors. He will not purify the Buddha field of mature beings, but if he doesn't purify the Buddha field of mature beings, then he will not fully know the supreme enlightenment. And why? Because his turning over is spoiled by poison. Moreover, the Bodhisattva who courses in perfection of wisdom should thus consider, as the Buddhas and Lords cognize it, through that dharmahood should that wholesome root be turned over, then it will actually and successfully be turned over. In this way, I turn it over through this dharmahood to the supreme enlightenment. The turning over has given rise to great merit, which is weak. The Lord, well said, Subhuti, well said, you who explained the mass of turning over to the Bodhisattvas, the great beings, by way of signless and baseless, by way of non-production and non-manifestation, by way of non-defilement and non-purification, by way of non-existence and of the emptiness of own marks, by way of Dharma element of suchness, of non-falseness, and of unaltered suchness. If all the beings in the great Trichyly cosmos were to become recipients of the 10 waves, of wholesome actions, of the 4 trances, etc., of the 5 superknowledges, would they on the strength of that beget much merit? Subhuti, they would learn. A merit greater than this would that son or daughter of good family beget, who would turn over the wholesome rules by a turning over which is without any stain. For such a turning over on the part of that son or daughter of good family is proclaimed the most excellent of all. The turning over has given rise to great merit, which is medium. Moreover, Subhuti, if all the beings in the great Trichyly cosmos were to become stream winners, etc., to arhats, and if someone would during his entire life honor, revere, and worship them with robes, etc., would he or the strength of that beget much merit? Subhuti, he would, O Lord, the Lord, greater than his would be the merit of someone who would turn over the wholesome roots by a turning over which is without stain. Moreover, Subhuti, if all beings in the great three cosmos were to become Pratyekabuddhas, and if someone would during his entire life honor, revere, and worship them with robes, etc., would he, on the strength of that, beget much merit, Subhuti? He would learn greater than his would be the merit of someone who would turn over wholesome roots by turning over which is without stain. The turning over is a given rise to great merit which is strong. Moreover, Subhuti, if all beings in this great cosmos would set out for the supreme enlightenment, and if in all the 10 directions all the beings in the countless world system would for countless eons honor, revere, and worship one single Bodhisattva with robes, etc., and furnish him with all he might need, would those sons and daughters of good family on the strength of that beget a great deal of merit? Subhuti, a great deal indeed, O Lord. That merit would, in fact, be infinite. It would not be easy to find a comparison for this foundation of meritorious work. If that foundation of meritorious work were a material thing, it would not find room even in all the world system, countless like the sands of the Ganges. Lord, well said, Subhuti. Well spoken was that which you have just said. Greater than that would be the merit of someone who would thus turn over wholesome roots into the supreme enlightenment by turning over which is without stain. Such a turning over of wholesome roots is proclaimed as the most excellent of all. The mass of merit previously mentioned will be infinitesimal compared with the mass of merit due to the turning over which is without stain. And why? Because those who were endowed with the 10 ways of custom actions, the 4 trances, etc., to the 5 superknowledges, were also perceivers of a basis. And so were those who honored, revered, and worshipped with robes, etc., all those things, all those beings who had become stream winners, etc., to our hearts and Pratyekabuddhas, and furnished them with all they might need. For this was only a matter of honoring, revering, and worshiping Bodhisattvas who are based on something. Thereupon the 4 great kings and 20,000 gods belonging to their host paid homage to the Lord with folded hands and said, "A great transformation surely, O Lord, is this turning over by which this Bodhisattva, the great being, with his skill and means in a manner which takes nothing as a basis, which is without stain, which is without sign, turns over those wholesome roots into the utmost right and perfect enlightenment, and turns them over in such a way that he approaches neither duality nor non-duality. Thereupon Shakra, chief of gods, together with 100,000 gods of the 33 worship the Lord with heavenly flowers, incense, lamps, perfumes, wreaths, ornaments, aromatic powders, garments, parasol, banners, and with music from heavenly musical instruments and cymbals, and they spoke as follows: a great transformation, non-duality. Further again, as Suyama God, as Samtushita, Nirmanarati, Paranirmita Vashabharatin God, together with many hundreds of thousands of deities, said to the Lord, a great transformation, non-duality. Thereupon many hundreds of thousands of goddesses and nudists of the Brahma Parshadi gods came to where the Lord was saluted, and Lord's feet with their hands raised their voices and uttered the following words: "It is wonderful, O Lord, how much a Bodhisattva, great being who has been taken hold of by the perfection of wisdom and by skill and means, surpasses the wholesome roots of those previously mentioned Bodhisattvas and sons and daughters of good family who are based on something." And so spoke 17 other classes of gods up to the highest gods. Thereupon the Lord said to those gods, from the gods belonging to the 4 great kings up to the highest gods, if, O gods, all the beings in the great cosmos had all set out for full enlightenment, and if they all, by way of taking something as a basis, would, after they had piled them up and rejoiced at them, turn over into full enlightenment the fallen wholesome roots, those of the past, future, and present Tathagatas Arhats, full enlightened ones with their congregations of disciples and with their Pratyekabuddhas, beginning with the first thought of enlightenment, going on until the time when they have fully known the utmost right and perfect alignment, going on until they have entered parinirvana, in the nirvana element, which leaves nothing behind, and up to the establishment of their good dharma, the wholesome root acquired by those Buddhas and lords in that interval, and by those disciples, and by those Pratyekabuddhas, and by all those beings different from them, the wholesome root which has issued from the perfection of giving, etc., to the perfection of wisdom, the mass of morality, the mass of concentration, the mass of wisdom, the mass of emancipation, the mass of the cognition of vision of emancipation, and in addition, the other measureless Buddha dharmas. And if, on the other hand, a son or daughter of good family has set out for full enlightenment and turns the above wholesome roots over into full enlightenment after he has piled them all up, heaped them up, weighted them up, they all up, and has rejoiced over them with the most excellent rejoicing, and he turns over in that manner of not taking anything as a basis, by way of non-duality, without a sign, without a stain, treating all dharmas as inactive, then that second son or daughter of good family begets much more merit than the previously mentioned son or daughters of good family, and their wholesome roots is incomparably superior to theirs. This turning over of the Bodhisattva, which takes nothing as a basis, is the one which is described as the most excellent, etc., to as something quite unsurpassed, rejoicing. Subhuti. How it is that jubilation becomes the most excellent, etc., to something quite unsurpassed? The Lord, the jubilation of a Bodhisattva becomes the most excellent, etc., to something quite unsurpassed when he doesn't seize upon or realize or release the wholesome dharmas of the Tathagatas of the past, future, and present, together with their Pratyekabuddhas, and also the wholesome dharmas of all beings. And if he doesn't mind them, not despise them, not apprehend them, but if he thinks to himself that therein no dharma is produced or stopped, defiled or purified, and that of those dharmas there is no diminution or growth, no coming or going, no heap and no non-existent, and if he resolves to rejoice in accordance with the suchness, non-falselessness, and unaltered suchness of those dharmas, with their dharmic nature, the established order of dharma, and the fixed sequence of dharma, and if after having rejoiced he turns it over into the supreme enlightenment, all other kinds of rejoicing are infinitely inferior to this one, and by comparison with them, this rejoicing is called the most excellent. Moreover, a son or daughter of good family who has newly set out in the vehicle and who wants to rejoice over the wholesome roots of the past, future, and present Tathagatas, together with their disciples and the Pratyekabuddhas, acquired between the production of the thought of the first third of enlightenment and the period when their dharma remains established, associated with the perfection of giving, etc., associated with the immeasurable Buddha dharmas, as well as over the wholesome roots of all other beings due to given morality and meditational development, he should rejoice as follows: as the resolve, so the give, the morality, etc., to the wisdom, as the resolve, so form, etc., to consciousness, as the resolve to the elements, etc., to Buddha dharmas, as the resolve to the vision of and cognition of emancipation, as the resolve, so the rejoicing, as the resolve to the past, future, and present Buddha dharmas, as the resolve, so the Buddhas and lords, and the resolve, as the resolve, so the full enlightenment of those Buddhas and lords, and the resolve to the parinirvana of those Buddhas and lords, as the resolve, so the disciples and Pratyekabuddhas of those Buddhas and lords, and the resolve, so the parinirvana of the disciples and Pratyekabuddhas, as the resolve, so the dharmahood of those Buddhas and lords, and the resolve, so the dharmahood of those disciples and Pratyekabuddhas, as the resolve, so is the dharmahood of all dharmas and of all beings who are unliberated, devoid of calm, undefiled, and unpurified. The dharmahood of those dharmas which are born, unarisen, unproduced, and unstopped. In this way he turns over to the supreme enlightenment, although nothing passes on and nothing is destroyed. This is the most excellent rejoicing of the Bodhisattvas. When he is endowed with this rejoicing, the Bodhisattva quickly knows full enlightenment. Moreover, Subhuti, if some follower of great vehicles should during the whole of his life honor, revere, and worship with robes, etc. those Buddhas and lords, together with their congregations of disciples who abide in all the 10 directions, in each single direction in the world systems, countless like the sands of the Ganges, and would give them everything that they might need. And if day and night he would put forth zeal to honor, revere, and worship those Buddhas and lords with flowers, etc., and if by way of taking something as a basis he would stand in morality, develop patience, exert vigor, enter into trance, and develop wisdom. And if, on the other hand, someone who has set out for the supreme enlightenment course and in the sixth perfection without taking anything as a basis, turns these wholesome rules over into the supreme enlightenment, then compared with this accumulation of merit and his accumulation of wholesome rules, the previously mentioned accumulation of merit is infinitesimally small. This is the turning over which is proclaimed as the most excellent, etc., to as something quite unsurpassed. It is thus that the Bodhisattva who courses in the six perfections and who has rejoiced over those wholesome rules by way of skill in means and by way of taking nothing as a basis should turn these wholesome rules over into the supreme enlightenment. This is the end of the 33rd chapter of the large Sutra on perfect wisdom, the Satasahasrika Prajnaparamita Sutram.